Hello everyone, my name is Chris Lasakis and this is my discussion board presentation. I chose a paper titled The Assessment of a Severe Weather Warning System and Disaster Preparedness from Calhoun County, Alabama in March of 1994. And this paper was done by Simon, Liu, and others. The main reason why I chose this paper is because I'm studying tornado sirens under Dr. Sherman Morris. And I thought it would be a great way for me to not only learn about tornado sirens and their effectiveness, but also to obviously fulfill the requirement for this course. Also, what I found particularly interesting about this paper was that I'm interested in the Palm Sunday tornado outbreak from March 27th, 1994. That's what this event covered, this study covered, and I've studied that at various times throughout, my meteorological college career, and I really find it fascinating, and so I figured this would be a great paper to study for this requirement. We'll go ahead and jump right on into it. So the purpose of this paper, this study, was to gather data concerning the three following items: the effectiveness of severe weather warning systems in the form of television and radio, sirens, as I just mentioned, and word of mouth, phone, and radio scanner. Also to study shelter access and use. Did the resident participants have access to shelter? If they did have access to shelter, did they use it? And also the housing type among survey participants. What types of dwellings did the participant residents have? And there, that bottom bullet down there, shelter-seeking behavior after receiving warnings was also studied. The knowledge of warnings, exactly how did the participants view the warnings, their meaning, and did they respond appropriately once receiving the warnings? And as well as education. So basically, did the education that the participants had determine their shelter-seeking behavior? So going forward, a little bit of methodology for you. There were two surveys conducted. Survey 1 was of rural Calhoun County, Alabama residents. This was an area that was under a tornado warning and was struck by a tornado. Stage 1 of this survey, the methodology consisted of the tornado path was outlined using a detailed map, and portions of roadways within that region of Calhoun County, within 1.5 miles, either side of that roadway of the tornado's path, were identified. So each roadway within that 1.5 miles of each side of the tornado path was assigned as a cluster. And because this is such a rural area, that part of northern Calhoun County, Alabama, only 44 clusters were identified. Again, the clusters being roadways within 1.5 miles either side of the tornado's path. Because there were only 44 clusters being identified within that part of Calhoun County, every cluster was sampled. And that's one of the key take-home messages there to consider. Stage 2 of Survey 1, 5 consecutive households were selected from a random starting location within each cluster. So that's how that was determined. And Survey 2. Survey 2 was completed in Jacksonville, Alabama, which is a part of Calhoun County. Jacksonville was an area with tornado warnings, but that was not struck by the tornado. So that's important to remember. Stage 1 of the methodology for this survey consisted of grids consisting of 4 square blocks in area were superimposed onto a detailed street map of Jacksonville, Alabama. And 30 out of 101 sections were randomly selected and designated as a cluster. Stage 2, 7 consecutive households were selected from a random start again within each cluster, and a sampling technique which is commonly used. This is a sampling technique which is commonly used in determining vaccine coverage and in assessing needs after disasters. 1 random adult was selected and interviewed from each household, and the individual's tornado preparedness knowledge was assessed via questions concerning National Weather Service definitions of a tornado watch and warning. So that this bullet right here, the warning system effectiveness was found by asking if and by which method participants first heard a warning. So how did they hear about the warning? And the next one down, respondents were asked if they would usually seek shelter if they heard a warning. And the bottom bullet, shelter-seeking predictors were examined using a multiple logistic regression model. And we'll go into some of those details now that we've laid the background methodology. So results for Survey 1. Again, this is rural Calhoun County, Alabama, the area that had a tornado warning and that was struck by a tornado. The 194 people were interviewed. The mean age was 48 years. A couple more stats for you. The majority were white. 145, that's 74.7%, had at least a high school education. And 89.2 could distinguish between a tornado watch and warning. That was 173 participants, 89.2%. So that's a significant finding. Warning reception. Remember, there's no siren coverage here. So 28.9% of participants received their tornado warning period. They received a tornado warning, 28.9%. And of that, 73.2% received the warning via television and radio. And shelter access. Shelter access, guys, is defined as having a basement or underground shelter within 5 minutes walking distance of the residents. 156 of those 194 residents did not have shelter, and that's 80.4%. The housing type, down there at the bottom, single family dwellings made up 72.7% of those dwellings there within rural Calhoun County, Alabama. So over here on the right, I have a table from the Liu et al. Study, and it just breaks it down a little bit more for you. And this is where I got obviously all my information from. Single family dwellings, you can see all the stats there of the housing. Access to shelters, you can see that. One of the most amazing things I found, and we're going to talk about this more in a moment, was Survey 2. And 61.8%, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but 61.8% of the 88% of people that received warnings in Jacksonville, Alabama, 61% of that 88% received their warnings from sirens. And that in my opinion, is a very interesting fact, and shows that sirens are obviously still part of an integrated warning system. But let's go on now to Survey 2's results, and I'll show you. This obviously was from Jacksonville, Alabama. This was an area with tornado warnings, but was not struck by a tornado. 193 people were interviewed. The mean age was 54 years. 56% were women, and the majority were white. 83.4% had at least a high school education. That's significant. Keep that in mind. And 85.5% knew the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. So other studies have also shown that the majority of people in tornado areas hit by a tornado do know the difference between a watch and a warning. So that's good. Warning reception, remember this is the area with siren coverage. 88% of participants received a tornado warning, and of those 88, 61.8 got them the warning via sirens. So I think that's good. 33.5% got the warning via television and radio right here. Shelter access, still 67.4% did not have a basement or underground shelter available within 5 minutes of walking distance. So that's interesting. And there at the bottom, the housing type, single family dwelling still dominated by far, even more so than rural Calhoun County at 92.7% for Jacksonville. Obviously, there were less mobile homes there in Jacksonville, which you would expect. And a couple interesting things over here on the right, guys. You can see that access to shelter, those that did not have access to shelter, but that wanted to, this would be an underground shelter or a basement. Okay, remember that's what we're classifying as shelter in this case, in this study. Of those that did not have shelter, 75 of the 193 participants from this study still attempted to seek shelter of some kind. On the opposite end of the spectrum, those that did have access to shelter, 53 of them did seek shelter, 10 of them did not. So that's interesting. Understanding of the warnings. Again, the majority did understand the warnings according to the surveys. Of the amount that did understand the warnings, 118 of those sought shelter. And the education down there at the bottom, this is interesting. So if you look at those that did not have a high school education, right here outlined in red, 23 of them did not seek shelter, whereas 9 of them did. Look at the ones that had at least a high school education, 68 of them did seek shelter. So obviously you can tell that the shelter-seeking behavior, the strongest discriminator was whether or not the individual had at least a high school education. And that is, having less than a high school education has the greatest confidence interval, has the greatest values located within that 95% confidence interval, and also statistically important for the odds ratio, which is basically taking the odds of two events and comparing them there. So that high school education was an important part of this study. Okay, so in conclusion, the following elements are important to an effective disaster prevention system. Having sirens, we can tell that sirens are still an important part of an integrated warning system, still have relevance today, no matter how developed and advanced our technology gets with cell phones and weather radios. I personally believe that sirens are still very important in that process. Access to shelter is important, as you can see here, and that's important to community developers and leaders to know that, as well as to individuals to know where to go. And teaching appropriate responses to warnings is also important. So understanding the difference between the watch and the tornado warning, and knowing what to do when you receive that warning, and having many different ways to receive it as well, not just relying on one method. Layered methods are the best way to receive the tornado warnings in case one method fails or two methods fail. Okay, so here is my my link to and my citation here from my paper that I read by Liu et al. 94, and down here at the bottom is my multiple choice question. Thank you so much, and y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.